Okay, you can go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I look forward to talking to you all about able accounts. I have an agenda here. We'll talk. I'll even share my screen. If you're not familiar with Zoom, I do encourage to look for your reactions tab because that'll be the primary method. I'll ask some questions. So if I get thumbs up or smiley faces or claps, that's a great way to do it. And so before we get started about really talking about Able United, Able accounts, who these accounts are for, what even an Able account is, by show of either a raised hand or a smiley face or clappy face, how many of you have heard of Able accounts or Able United before today? All right, I see a couple of hands. I'm gonna pull up that participant list to see because I could check. I could check if you're using your emotes or not. All right. There's a couple thumbs up. All right. Well, good stuff. Well, hopefully today you're gonna learn so much that you could take over my job. So that's the goal. If I could educate you all enough, then it will put me out of work. So let's get started here. Give me 1 second while I'll bring up my back-end presentation here. So as I mentioned, we are the state of Florida's ABLE program, Able United. It is a unique name, right? Because previously a company called Able Trust, who still exists, is around. And so I wasn't here to help say, hey, maybe we should stay away from the putting Able in our name. But anyways, we'll talk a little bit about the difference between Able Trust and Able United. But we are a tax advantage savings and investment program, which is pretty unique in who it's for. And the genesis behind this is when the brand was launched, we really thought we were going to partner with other states or become a nationwide program. We have the capability to do that, but instead we said, no, let's just keep serving Florida residents. So we're really only Florida focused. And so today we're going to kind of talk through several items on our agenda here, kind of the history and legislation, how this program exists, how it came about in the first place. We're going to talk a little bit about how it's managed here in the state of Florida. We'll also look at some national information. That's not one of the bullet points, but we'll kind of take a zoom out and see where we're at nationally with all the other ABLE programs each state have launched. Talk about who these accounts are for, who's eligible for them, an enrollment process, what that looks like, how this type of account interacts with public benefits. Then we'll touch a little bit on ABLE accounts and special needs trust. We'll talk about one of the probably number one questions we receive is what happens if the individual dies, the death of beneficiary. And then we'll walk through some very hypothetical type situations, how to reach us, but then we'll also have FAQs. And I encourage you, if you do have an FAQ, you can raise your hand. Is one way to put it in there. You can put it in the chat box. Any of those would be great ways to let me know if you have a question. So let's go ahead and get started with the kind of the history and legislation. And before I go to the next slide, it does have a pretty rich history of how this program came about. And really, it started way before 7 years ago when this program launched. That started about probably almost 20 years ago now, when a group of parents sat around a dining room table, and primarily in the Down syndrome community, and wanted to know why there really wasn't a tool for them to start putting money aside without jeopardizing their child's future when it came to them being eligible for public benefits like SSI and Medicaid. So really, this is a grassroots movement type of program that launched, and it took, 10 years of advocacy work for it to finally get passed. What it did was actually it passed in 2014 in December. And so if you've been in the disability community, if you've been being guardians in the legal community, you probably know acronyms. Everything is an acronym. ABLE is no different. ABLE stands for actually achieving a better life experience. And the piece of legislation that passed and enacted the ability for states to create this program was called the Achieving Better Life Experience Act. And that happened in 2014. And what it did was it amended the Internal Revenue Code, actually created a brand new section, 529A. If you're familiar with 529, if you heard that terminology, 529 accounts or college savings accounts, those type of programs have existed prior. And so it kind of mimics, from an IRS standpoint, how these accounts are treated when it comes to being a tax advantage type of account. And at the end of the day, if you take one thing away, I want you to understand what an ABLE account actually is. High level, it's a savings and investment account with some very unique advantages for the individuals who can utilize them. and not everybody can have an ABLE account. We'll kind of talk about who that is. But what it does is really allow individuals with disabilities to start putting money aside, not impacting their benefits, and then really utilize those funds at any point to really help support their health, independence, or quality of life. And so when I mentioned that this is a savings and investment account, it's kind of similar to other products that existed before, whether that be college savings plans. If you think of a health savings account, very specific types of health-related needs, a checking savings account, a special needs trust. So kind of like all these different financial products mushed together to really create this unique ABLE account. And as I mentioned, each state, once the federal legislation passed, each state had to enact their own piece of legislation to set this up. So as of today, there's 47 programs that have launched across the state, including DC. Currently, there's only 4 states in the country that have not enacted legislation in their state, and that is Idaho, North and South Dakota, and Wisconsin. However, this map that is on the screen right now kind of shows you a breakdown of those states that are open up for both nationwide enrollment as those states that are only open for their state's residents. So if you notice Florida in the bottom right here, they're gold, which means that we're only open for the state residents of Florida. Same with Texas and Georgia, Missouri, even Washington. But some states went ahead and did nationwide enrollment, and that kind of took effect after the passing of the ABLE Act, because when it first passed, some states were concerned that they weren't going to be able to launch a program for a while, and so residents in their state would be disadvantaged. So they came back and amended to allow states to have the ability to open this up to nationwide enrollment. And just a little bit of the background, just because as we talk to this, and you probably know this as well, Florida legislation, Florida statutes, Florida guardianship rules, talking to your local Social Security offices, it's all unique to where you're at. And I would always fear if, like, I got a call from somewhere out in Colorado and they wanted me to say, hey, my Social Security office told me I can't have an ABLE account, I wouldn't even know where to begin to reach out to Colorado's Social Security office. So that's kind of part of the reason why we're really just primarily focused on Florida residents. But what's unique, if you are a Florida resident, you do have access to about 27 other ABLE programs out there. And so really the differences, if you think just high level, taking a step back of the differences between ABLE programs, really, the similarities, first of all, is we're all have to follow the same ABLE legislation that passed federally. That federal law, the final regulations that the Treasury put out, all states have to follow those applicable rules. We all had to pass our own state legislation. Primarily, most of the ABLE programs you're going to see throughout the country, they're going to be run by the same state program or state entity that runs their college savings programs. Most of those are going to be Treasury offices. And then we all have online enrollment. And Florida is no different. That's going to be the primary way to get started in the program is an online enrollment. Really, the differences you're going to be seeing between these different programs are the fee structure. Not to brag on Florida yet, but we're free. But most other states have a monthly or annual fee that what they call a maintenance fee that's charged to an account. Also, just like Florida, we're Florida only. Some states are open up for both their state residents and national wide. The investment and savings tools, and we'll talk about Florida specific investment, but some states offer more investment products. Some other ABLE programs offer a checkbook and literally a checkbook and a checking account. And so it's a little bit different there on how those states are run. Who's actually managing the back-end system's going to be different. There's primarily 3 different companies that are doing it. We use a company called Vestwell, so you might hear me reference them. They're our back-end records-keeping system. And then finally, Medicaid recovery. And we'll spend some time on that when we get to the public benefits section, discussing what Medicaid recovery is, why that may be something you may need to pay attention to, especially if you have a ward or your guardian of somebody that's going to be at the age 55 or older, that may impact them. So, going the wrong way. And so just give you a high level, let's paint the picture here, what this looks like nationwide. So ABLE United, these stats are as of last week. We have a little over 12,000 that have enrolled in the state of Florida's program, with 10,000 of those being active, which means they have an account balance. And we manage a little over 78 million on behalf of those 10,000 constituents, which is pretty significant. And if you think about historically, most individuals that were relying on public benefits weren't even allowed to have $2,000 into their name, and now they have combined over 78 million. Nationwide, if you just take a step back, look at the whole nation, over 150,000 able accounts have been established. Forgot a zero there. That's 150,000. And $1.5 billion in assets under management. So it's just amazing to see how these programs have grown, how the assets under management grown, and just the amazing success stories we hear of people purchasing their first home because of an able account, putting a down payment on a vehicle, or even just taking a trip that they weren't ever going to be able to save for. So it's kind of cool. And so feel free, as I mentioned, to pepper in questions through the chat box. I'll try to pay attention to that. Raise your hand if you have any types of questions, but we're going to keep going on through here. So let's talk about Florida specific. As I mentioned, we are the state of Florida's program, Able United. The state of Florida passed their own legislation in 2015. And it's kind of this interesting quasi type of government situation where I'm a state employee. The program's actually run by a nonprofit board. And so we call that a direct support organization. It's actually a direct support organization of the Florida Prepaid College Board. So we have our own Florida statute section that tells you all about how this program is set up. And then we launched July 1 of 2016. And so it's a pretty interesting setup here, but we're under the Florida Prepaid College Savings Plan. And so how many of you have heard, has anybody heard of Florida Prepaid before? Maybe, yeah, I see a couple head shakes, yes. So, you know, they've been around for 30 plus years, have helped over 1 million families save for higher education expenses, and manage a little over $12 billion for those families. So, I mean, it's a pretty amazing program. There's also a foundation that we run that helps at-risk youth receive scholarships to be able to go to college. So it's a really robust type of program, but one of the programs they run inside of that is Able United, which unfortunately I'm the sole person responsible for this program for the state. But let's talk about actually, as we move and start digging into what an Able account is, these are just some of the big 3 advantages of an Able account. Ownership, we're going to talk about who actually owns the Able account. It's going to be that person with the disability, but somebody else can manage it on their behalf, like a guardian. We're going to talk about how this is really flexible, where the money and the resources in the account doesn't impact SSI or Medicaid, but then family and friends can put money in their Able account, and that not count as income towards them. So it provides some kind of unique features without jeopardizing people's eligibility for public benefits. Then we'll talk about tax benefits, tax-free earnings. We'll talk a little bit about will they get tax forms if they have an Able account, and really the uniqueness of being able to pay for a variety of expenses, even housing, and not impact their SSI. So we'll talk all about that. And what I love most about this program is that when this legislation passed, yes, it started in the Down syndrome community, but it really opened the door for a lot of individuals. So if you think of, when I say the round table, this top left picture is Jen Sikora and her son Sean. They were the founders. They were at that dining room table that took place in Virginia. They moved down here to Florida. They were our first account holders. And, you know, she started advocating for Sean to have an Able account when he was 3. He just celebrated his 21st birthday. So you can tell this has been a long time running to get it up and running. But it's not just individuals with Down syndrome. Alicia here on the bottom, cerebral palsy, uses primarily a wheelchair and wants to save for a wheelchair accessible vehicle. You know, her mom's getting up there, primary caretaker, but was like, hey, what can I utilize my Able account for and not jeopardize my benefits? Hey, I could put money in this account to hopefully get that wheelchair accessible. And then we have some individuals that may not even need public benefits. So this is Sean, Elliot and his mom, Sandra. Elliot, he has an Able account. He puts money from his DJing work that he gets in there, kind of plays in the market, let it grow, but knowing that he can utilize that for fun or for help supporting his business needs. So it's pretty cool on how people are utilizing an Able account. So we're going to dig into who's actually eligible to open an account. So these accounts are amazing and have a lot of great benefits, but it's really only designed for individuals with significant disabilities or diagnoses. One thing I want to make clear is that unlike other financial products where you can have multiple checking accounts or savings accounts, an individual can only have one Able account nationwide. And so I think there's an example I'll give later of like what happens if somebody moves out of the state, when they move into the state, how does that work? And we'll talk about that. So these are the 3 requirements for the Able United program. One is they do have to be a Florida resident at the time they apply. If they move out of the state, as I mentioned, they could take the Able account with them. That's fine. Check out what that new state's Able program is, but you do have to be a Florida resident, and there is no time period for establishment of residency. So some states, some other programs are like you have to be here for 2 years or set up residency of some sort. We just say, hey, check a mark. Are you living here in Florida? We'll say that's good enough for us. So that's the first requirement. That's unique to our program, Able United. The next two are true for all Able programs. One is they have to have a disability with onset prior to age 26. So that means that diagnosis had to occur prior to that age. It doesn't matter their age now. We have people in our program that are in their 80s who, had a significant disability when they were a child. We also have newborns in the system. And so we have a gamut. Actually, the average age, I think, of our beneficiary right now is 35. So you can see it's a spectrum of individuals. I did put a note in here. So this is the presentation I usually do for attorneys and for judges. And so I try to provide some additional information. In the parentheses here, it says age 46 starting in 2026. So one of the big federal pushes that myself, as well as other Able programs and other advocacy organizations, was to up that age of onset from 26 to a later age, because there's a significant amount of disabilities that just happen to occur later in life. And so you might think of some types of mental health diagnoses. You could think of early onsets of some of these Alzheimer's or other types of diagnoses, lupus, multiple sclerosis, where that diagnosis might happen in your mid to late 30s, early 40s. And so hopefully with that age adjustment, not only will it impact some of the individuals you serve who might now qualify for Able, but it really will open the door up for, we estimate, about 600 to 700,000 additional individuals just here in the state of Florida that will be eligible for an Able account when that goes into effect. So, and then next requirement is that severity of the disability. And so when we talk about severity, it's really based on the Social Security Administration standard to receive benefits for a child, but regardless of their age. And so that's important to think about. This isn't something where, oh no, I got a significant arm injury, and now I have no use in my arm. You might not qualify for an Able account. So it's really individuals who have are receiving SSI or SSDI, or they have to self-certify that they meet that severity. They're just not receiving those public benefits. So if you're self-certifying, you would say, hey, I have a diagnosis from a doctor, I have the paperwork availability, or I have a physician's form that we have available on our website. I have that documentation in case it's ever asked. We won't ask for that information. However, the IRS, if the individual was audited, could ask for that information. So that's something to think. And I do see a question that came in here from Teresa. It says, what would happen if someone moves to one of the 4 states that do not participate in the program? That's fine. Those states currently, they're actually promoting other Able programs. You don't have to have an Able account in the state you're in. And so, so those state residents could say, hey, I want to open up California Able account because it's open for nationwide enrollment. And then with Florida, they could take that Able account with them because it's done online. However, some states have unique state tax benefits. For example, Pennsylvania has state income tax. And if you contribute to an Able program in their state, you could actually reduce that state income tax when you file. So it's just something to keep in mind. But good question. And so going back to that severity, what the IRS did was like, hey, how can we help individuals, or at least guide them to say what types of disabilities qualify? So they did provide some very broad categories. And so when somebody goes through the enrollment process, one of the questions they're going to say is categorize the type of disability you have. And so they'll have to select one of these 7 bolded subsections. So for example, developmental disorders. This could be autism, what they used to call Asperger's. Somebody corrected me, I guess it's now autism, and there's just high functioning autism. But developmental delays, they could be intellectual disabilities. And it would be helpful while we have that chat box in here. If you're all guardians, are you guardians for individuals that fit one of these categories, or are you being guardians for individuals outside of these categories? That would be helpful for me as a one-off. But so intellectual disabilities, anybody that's qualifying, for example, iBudget waiver through APD, all those individuals qualify for ABLE. But it's much broader than that. So you see psychiatric disorders. This could be schizophrenia, bipolar, PTSD, even some of the eating types of disorders. Those would qualify. It has on here ADHD was an example of one, but it'd have to be a significant ADHD, most likely that has several other diagnoses with it. But also blindness, deafness, cerebral palsy, congenital anomalies. We talked about Down syndrome, as well as other cystic fibrosis. And finally, there's even an other category that really kind of gets these one-off, like sickle cell or hemophilia, where they may qualify for an ABLE account. So think of those types of disabilities that are going to go with a lifetime of a person, right? Most likely they're not going to be cured. It's something that's going to impact their daily living. They're going to have to go through additional doctor's appointments or take medication. So this is the type of significant disabilities we're talking about that would otherwise qualify for ABLE accounts. So keep that in mind. And I put on here our little eligibility wizard. It can be helpful. It's helpful sometimes if somebody's on SSI, SSDI, because they automatically qualify. If they check that self-certify, it will give this list, but then it also provides some of the guidance of where at Social Security they can go and read about their type of disability to see if it qualifies. So any questions as it relates to just the eligibility portion of who's eligible for an ABLE account? All right, I'm not seeing any so far. And thank you for, I got one sponsor, developmental intellectual psychiatric. Yeah, so yeah, those types of diagnoses you guys would understand if you're qualified. But if you do have a question and have a one-off, I'll go ahead and plug myself now. Maybe you have a client, or maybe you want to have an additional discussion. I haven't put our contact us information on there, but our website, ableunited.com, under our contact us page, you can actually go and book a 15-minute appointment with me if you do have a one-off question. So let's talk about ownership. Ownership, as I mentioned, this is unique, right? Unlike for example, a special needs trust set up by a third party, this account is actually owned by the individual with the disability. This is their account. They're the owner of it. However, somebody else might not be able to, they may not be able to manage it. And so they have to have somebody else sign up and be that authorized signatory on the account. As you see on here, the first one is legal guardian. And this is really a hierarchy. So guardians do have kind of that top level, but other individuals that can manage this account include a power of attorney, parent, spouse, sibling, grandparent, and even a rep payee under Social Security Administration. And so we usually call this individual, when you're going through the enrollment process or call customer service, we usually call that individual that has that authorization on the account an ALR, an authorized legal representative. So just in case you see that language. All right, let's continue on here. And all right, I'm going straight into enrollment, looks like. So we talked about who owns the account, who can manage the account. Well, let's talk about what the account looks like and how you actually utilize it. And then we'll go back and talk about how this works with public benefits. We'll talk a little bit about special needs trust. So enrollments, as I mentioned, is done online. We're an office of one. I'm here in Tallahassee. We do have forms you can print out and mail in if you would like, but typically you're not going to go to a bank. You're not going to walk into your local Social Security office or anything to enroll in this program. You're actually going to have to go online, ableunited.com. The enrollment process takes about 15 to 20 minutes. You'll need an email address. That'll be what you'll use to log into the account. But then we're going to need some personal identification information, since this is a financial product. Date of birth, social. If you're doing this on behalf of your ward, then we're going to need your information as well as you selecting on why they're eligible for this account. Once that process is finalized, you'll get an email. You have to confirm your email, and then it'll actually ask you to select investment and savings options, including the ability to tie a bank account. There's two methods when you go to actually add a bank account, and that's the primary mechanism you're going to use to put money in to the ABLE account. via ACH is through a connected bank account. We use a platform called Plaid that's inside that's going to ask you to log into that bank account to tie it directly. Alternatively, you can just send in checks if you would like. There's an option to do that as well. To get started, there is a minimum $25 contribution to get started in the account, so keep that in mind, as well as selecting the investment. So when you make that initial $25 contribution, you're going to have to select where that money is actually going to go. And this is what's unique about the account in itself, is it's both a savings tool and an investment tool kind of into one. And so on the investment side of the house, we have what we call pre-designed portfolios. And so there's three of them: conservative, moderate, and growth. Those are pre-designed risk-based portfolios where it's made up of underlying mutual funds, different percentages based on how much risk. So for example, the conservative is going to have less money in the US stock fund mutual fund and more money in the bond fund, while the growth one will reverse that, where you'll have more in the US stock and international mutual fund option instead of the bond fund. So something to think about. Also, as I mentioned, if somebody has the ability or has financial literacy, knows how to invest, they may want to design their own portfolio, or even actually make this a savings and investment account, or a savings account, I should say. So if you look on the right side here, the fund options, these are, you'll hit all 8 options, the first 3, the conservative, moderate, and growth, but then the next 5 options are what we call individual fund options. And those individual fund options actually make up those pre-designed portfolios. But we have, on the least riskiest side, we have an FDIC savings fund. So you'll get what they call pass-through FDIC protection up to $250,000 through the Bank of New York Mellon. That has no fees tied to it. It right now is paying a little over about 5.5%, I think, is the annual rate of return on the FDIC savings fund. And that person who has money in that option will get some interest at the end of each month, like you would a savings account. But the other ones are actually investment options. So we have a money market fund that's kind of the state of Florida's money market account called Florida Prime. We also have a U.S. bond, U.S. stock, and international stock. And the good news is you're not going to have John Finch actually investing your money. You're actually putting your money in these mutual funds through Vanguard, BlackRock type of organizations that manage trillions of dollars. And so not John Finch social work background. You don't want me, based on my last return on investment in my Roth IRA, you don't want me investing your money. So, all right, so let's talk about actually putting money into the ABLE account. How does that work? Who can do it? Anybody can contribute to an ABLE account. I usually joke that I have a friend of mine. He was probably the 3rd or 4th one to open an ABLE account, and every year he sends me a message to contribute to his ABLE account. And the last time I saw it, I was like, you have more money in your ABLE account than I have in a couple of my retirement accounts. So I don't know. I think you should be the one taking me out for lunch. But anyways, so anybody put money in it. It could be family, friends, businesses, organizations. Special needs trust can be used to fund an ABLE account. And the individual with the disability, they can put their own money in there. So if they're working, if they have leftover Social Security funds, those can be contributed to an ABLE account. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like when we get to the public benefits section. But there is a cap, and it's $17,000 per calendar year from all sources. That amount's based on the annual gift tax that occasionally goes up. There's rumors of it going up again next year, which would make it $18,000 in 2024. Hasn't been confirmed by IRS yet, but and that's an aggregate amount. So if I put in $10,000 in somebody's ABLE account and they put $2,000 of their own money, that's $12,000. So they can only put $5,000 more from any source for that rest of the calendar year. But each calendar year that resets. Now, there is the ability for individuals to contribute above that amount if they are working and not saving for retirement. So maybe their employment doesn't allow them to or doesn't offer a retirement product, then they can actually utilize the ABLE account for retirement funds and actually contribute an additional $13,590 above that $17,000, or their earned income for that year, whatever the lesser is. So it's a unique thing. I would say there's about 5% of our accounts have taken advantage of that. And so it allows, maybe they have family and friends that want to contribute, and then they can also contribute above that, since they're not saving for retirement. And they could take advantage of the savers tax credit. So it does have some benefits, some tax benefits, credits, if you use an ABLE account in that way. One thing, and I'll harp on this again when we talk about SSI, but an individual putting their earned income into an ABLE account still counts as income. ABLE accounts do not shelter income, they shelter assets and resources. So keep that in mind if you're thinking, oh, they'll open an ABLE account, they'll earn $12,000 or $1,200 a month, and they'll get their full SSI check. No. ABLE doesn't shelter earned income, so keep that in mind. And then finally, other ways to contribute into an ABLE account is through a 529 college savings plan. So some people might have leftover college savings funds, or maybe the individual you're serving, the family thought they were going to go off to college, never did, and they have this college savings plan. They can actually roll that over into an ABLE account. And just another word on college savings plans. The rollover terminology is very broad on the 529 side, the college savings side, where it could be brother, sister, it could be uncle, aunt, parents, anybody that had a 529, that's family just about, could roll that over to an ABLE account. However, from ABLE to ABLE, it's very limited and only can be towards a sibling. So kind of interesting. When somebody does create an ABLE account, they do have the ability to create an online gifting platform. So think of a unique GoFundMe page that's tied directly to their ABLE account. That's an option for individuals. They have family and friends that want to contribute to them electronically. And I think it's via ACH. So just keep that in mind. But that is an option and feature we offer. All right. So another question for you: how many of you in your families are the spender? Any spenders? Or we have anybody that's like, hey, I'm not allowed to look at the checkbook because then I'll use it all? Anybody? No. All of you are savers. Look at that. All right. Well, I'll take you guys out for lunch because I like to spend the money. I'm the spender of the family. And so how do you actually use money out of an ABLE account? There's a couple of ways. So when it comes to, hey, money's been growing, we want to utilize it. How do we get money out? The primary mechanism is electronic transfer back to a connected bank account. And there is a way to add multiple bank accounts. So we have some that maybe they have families have one bank account that's contributing, and then they have their own bank account where money is withdrawn to it. Or you can, whatever connected bank account you have, that's a way to transfer money in and out. So you would initiate that on the ABLE side to put money from the ABLE into that bank account. And the same for taking money out of that other account, you would initiate it out of the ABLE account. And so you can also request for a check to be sent to that individual or a third party. And that's done online as well, and there's no fee for that. We also have an optional ABLE Visa prepaid card. It's through a company called TrueLink Financial. Some of you might have heard of TrueLink. A great feature. And so they actually run our prepaid card program. So it is a separate enrollment process, but it provides linking directly to an ABLE account and provides some additional benefits, like being used whenever a Visa is accepted, or being able to provide some additional notes on withdrawals and stuff like that. Things to consider, though, when somebody does take money out of their ABLE account. First of all, it's the earnings portion of the withdrawal. Like if you think of a Roth IRA, for example, where it's after tax dollars are going into this account, it grows or gains interest. When you make a withdrawal, part of that withdrawal is going to have some type of interest or growth on it. That is not taxable. If you think of like your bank account, you get a tax form at the end of the year. You have to pay taxes on that. Well, the good thing about ABLE, you have to have that person doesn't have to pay taxes on that earnings portion as long as they used it for a qualified disability expense. And we'll talk more about what that is on the next page. So tax-free earnings. Next, you get to choose how that money comes out. So some people want to make this both an investment and a savings tool. And maybe they want to just take money out of the savings portion, but leave their investment alone. They can do that, or vice versa. So really allows people to figure out how they want to put money in, and then when they take it out, gets to let them pick and choose as well. And we do recommend though, when somebody does make a withdrawal for an ABLE account, is to keep paperwork on what those withdrawals for the whole calendar year were used for. Like I mentioned, we're not going to ask for that, but if the IRS wished to audit an individual, they would want to say, hey, give us documentation. And so what happens is when somebody does make a withdrawal, it's going to trigger a couple of tax forms. The one is the 5498 QA. Now that tax form is for everybody who has an ABLE account. It's going to basically tell the IRS, hey, this person with this social has established an ABLE account. Here's why they're eligible, and then how much money is in that account. And that is something we send on an annual basis, so it's not something the beneficiary is going to have to submit. They'll just get the receipt saying, hey, if we had told the IRS that you had an ABLE account, and here's that proof. But if a withdrawal is made from the account, it's going to issue a 1099 QA. So if you think of 1099 interest form, this is a 1099 QA form. Same type of thing. It's going to show you how much money was taken out of the account, how much of that portion was earnings. And there is, no reason to file it unless you had no qualified disability expenses for that calendar year. And so once again, no tax on that, but for some reason, if there were no qualified disability expenses, then the earnings portion of those withdrawals would have to be paid income tax, an additional 10% penalty. As I mentioned, QDEs are so broad that literally the final regulations said they should be construed broadly. And really it's a gamut of things. And so the Treasury provided 13 broad buckets of what is considered a qualified disability expense. And this can be anything related to health. So this could be stuff Medicaid doesn't cover. It could be a dental appointment, co-pays. It could be, hey, I need to get a massage because that's a quality of life thing, and work is stressful. So anything health, and it could be things that aren't necessarily medically necessary, right? So if you think of that, so pretty broad. Education, this could be additional education, this could be higher education, it could be job skills training, whatever that's relating, that's helping improve or maintain their health independence or quality of life, then that would be qualified. Housing, transportation, legal fees, financial management, even funeral and burial. So if you think about utilizing this account for those last after death expenses, those would be qualified disability expenses. And they even put the caveat as other, and they haven't provided any additional information on what other is. When we requested for additional information, they only gave one example in the final regulations, and that said, let's say you had an individual that needs help navigating their community, then a cell phone and a cell phone plan would be a qualified disability expense. And so really when you take a step back, it's like, well, what's not qualified might be an easier answer. And usually anything that's not going to help improve or maintain their health, independence, or quality of life. So for example, purchasing gifts for somebody else, probably not going to be qualified. Anything illegal, for example, would not be qualified. Gambling would not be qualified. So really it has to relate back to that individual. And as I mentioned, help improve or maintain health, independence, or quality of life. And so here's just a little snippet I took from the final regulations that kind of explain how this is so broad. And when we asked for some additional information, they said, we're not going to provide any additional guidance because what may be a qualified disability expense for one person may not be for another. And so as I tell individuals, hey, keep records, IRS, they're looking on an annual basis. So when that 1099 comes in, it says, let's say, for example, you had $5,000 of withdrawals. IRS just wants to know if you had $5,000 in qualified disability expenses for the calendar. And so they're not looking dollar for dollar. Social Security is a little bit different, and we'll talk about that in the next section. But any questions about the product itself, the enrollment process, putting money in, taking money out, who can do what? Any questions as it relates to that? I'll give anybody a minute while I take a sip of water here. All right. Everybody still awake? Good. All right, here we go. So what is this cost, right? That's one of the questions we get. It's like, this sounds too good to be true. And what's unique being a state-run program and getting the backing of the Florida legislators is to make this program in existence. There are typically no fees associated for opening and establishing an account. Now, we do have what we call investment advisor fees. So on the investment products themselves, there's something called an annualized fee that's usually 0 to 0.29% of the balance. So for example, if you're in our riskiest options and had $10,000 in, it costs about $29. Now, when you see when somebody sees the returns on the account, that's net of that investment advisor fee. And then our FDIC option has no fee, so that's a completely free account. If somebody wants annual paper or paper statements to be sent quarterly, we do quarterly statements. That's a $10 annual fee if they want something in paper, or they can just go online and download it. And then I mentioned that prepaid card that we have, that does cost $2.50 per month to have access to that card. But we really try and strive to be the best value for Floridians. Like there's no application or monthly maintenance fee, no paper check request fee, and knowing that this program itself has been backed by a company that's been around or a state agency that's been around for 30 years and has helped millions of families invest and save. So we try to provide that kind of security of knowing that we think we know what we're doing, right? Don't we all don't we all think we know what we're doing? All right. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about public benefits. And this section is really important because this is probably one of the big key benefits of ABLE accounts is the ability to save and not impact Medicaid, SSI, HUD, Section 8 housing, EBT benefits, SNAP, those type of benefits. So we'll talk Medicaid, and you probably all know way more than I do about Medicaid and the various Medicaid programs, including the home and community-based waivers we have, and the long-term care budget. But one thing all Medicaid programs have in similarity is that it usually restricts on how much assets, how much money can be in somebody's name. Generally, funds in the ABLE account do not count towards that limit. So even if it's taken out of the ABLE account, as long as it's identified and there's a purpose for it, that's a qualified expense, it's not going to count as a resource or an asset. So that's very unique because it outlaws people to save. The maximum this account can go up to is $418,000. So it lets people on Medicaid actually have up to $400,000 in this ABLE account without jeopardizing their Medicaid. Now, there are some concerns about, okay, well, what happens if that beneficiary passes and there's money left over? And we'll talk more about this on the next slide. But generally, it would still be used to pay outstanding qualified disability expenses and then go to that beneficiary's estate. And we'll talk about what that estate process looks like for some individuals. So just keep in mind, though, not worried about impacting Medicaid at this point. So the other big benefit is SSI. SSI is a little more stringent, right? Social Security Administration has a lot of rules when it comes to being a rep payee or how SSI works. And so they have a whole section just on ABLE accounts and SSI. And they actually just released one specifically about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago on if you're a rep payee and you're a rep payee for an individual that has an ABLE account and some additional guidance there. But the big rules here I'm going to stress on is that, once again, you can have an ABLE account, have more than $2,000, not impact SSI. The rules change is how much money you can have in it. The first $100,000 does not count as a resource. Anything above that would count towards the SSI $2,000 limit. So think about that. If they're getting close to that amount, they may want to make a withdrawal if they're really relying on SSI. But once again, if they're on Medicaid because of SSI, if it goes over 100,000, and I have an example, they'll still maintain their Medicaid eligibility. Their SSI benefits would be suspended. So something to think about. The other big rule outside of the 100,000 for SSI is housing expenses. If you think of the purpose of an SSI check, it's to help offset housing costs. And so they said, hey, if you're using an ABLE account to pay for housing, that's okay. It just has to be done in the same month as that withdrawal, or have the ABLE account pay it directly. And I have an example of what I'm talking about on the next page. And so, so just be wary though, if you working with somebody that has SSI and an ABLE account, be proactive, let your Social Security office know that they have an ABLE account. We submit program information monthly to the Social Security Administration for their review. And as I mentioned, they have a whole, what we call program operations manual system, the online manual that Social Security uses for ABLE. You could go on there, read all about how they look at ABLE accounts. They update it. Seems like almost every year now with just a little bit of tweaks here and there. So let's give it some of those examples of using an ABLE account to pay for housing expenditures. So as I mentioned, that's an allowable expense. So it's one way where maybe you have a family that wants to help offset their housing costs, but if they do, it could impact their SSI, reducing it by a third. Well, if they put that money in the ABLE account and have the ABLE account pay it directly, you won't have to worry about having their SSI check reduced. So this is an example of Amy. Let's say she takes out $500 from her ABLE account. It says May, but we're in October. So let's say she takes it out this month, $500, deposits in her bank account. It sits there. November rolls around, and she takes that $500 out and pays her light bill, the utility bill. That's an allowable expense, but since that was a housing-related expense, and she's on SSI, that amount she paid for the utility bill out of her ABLE account funds, that would count as a resource at the beginning of that month. So something to think about, hey, if I'm using ABLE and I'm paying housing, just have the ABLE account pay it directly. That's why we do online check requests. Or if you do, make sure you withdraw it and pay it in the same month. So big thing is, hey, housing expenses and ABLE paid in the same month. If you maintain it past the end of the month, that's a no-no, and SSI could say, hey, that ABLE money now counts as a resource. So something to keep in mind. But the great benefit, though, if you structure it right, and maybe you have a ward that's living at home and they pay their fair share, it's a great way to get their full SSI check. Attorneys love that ability to do that. Here's another example of SSI in that $100,000 limit. Paul has an ABLE account with a balance of $101,000. He also has $1,500 in his ABLE account. If you count that, he's over $2,500. So he's over that $2,000 limit by $500. However, since it's his ABLE account that's causing him to be over that $2,000 threshold, so $1,500 in the checking, that's all the money he has, and then he has an extra $101,000, so $1,000 above that $100,000 limit in his ABLE account. Put those two together, he's over that maximum 2,000 limit. But however, since his ABLE account's causing him to be over that amount, they'll just suspend his SSI so he can maintain his eligibility for Medicaid. It's a little bit risky, right? Because what if you have, you go over, you have $2,010 in your checking account and 105. Well, since you have over 2,000 in your checking account, it's the first place they're going to let, and they're going to take away his SSI. So just something to be weary about. I would say, $100,000 is a lofty goal. I have about 30 accounts in our program that have over 100,000. So it is doable. Just something to monitor when you get close to that amount. So those are the two big ones, but the federal legislation says any means tested program. And so this is just some of the language I took from the federal implementing law that talks about what federally means tested means. But that's basically, hey, if there's an asset or income limit of some sort to apply for this public benefit, that is a means tested program. And so we already talked about Medicaid, Medicare. They sent out a letter to all states saying, hey, don't look at ABLE accounts. You shouldn't be counting them as an asset or resource for them. And so we're good there. SNAP, so Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. If you're receiving that, or the individuals you serve might be eligible for that. Guess what? ABLE accounts don't count as a resource for that. Same with HUD, housing assisted programs. They can't look at this. And even the FAFSA application, we've had a couple situations where a parent had an ABLE account and their child was applying for FAFSA, and they were like, well, do we count my parents' ABLE account? No, they don't. Nor do they count the beneficiary if they had an ABLE account. So something unique there about able accounts. But any questions on public benefits and able accounts? And we'll talk a little bit about the deaf towards the end, because I think that's a little bit tricky. Because that's the number one question we get about Medicaid and if an individual passes and what happens to the able account. So we'll get to that. But any other questions on public benefits so far? All right, it's a lively crew today. Everybody did not have their afternoon coffee. All right, let's keep going. Now, once again, I'm not an attorney, so this is educational information only. And you guys might know more about special needs trust than I do, but we'll talk very high level. So this is just very high level. Special needs trust. First thing I say is able accounts are not special needs trust. We are not a trust. Everybody says able trust, and I said no, that's a different company. They're down the road. They actually moved their office to literally a block down the road. They get in my mail now, and I was like, why did you? Anyways, but we're not a trust, and so trust is its own thing. It's completely found in a different part of the U.S. code. Able accounts are in the IRS section of the code, and so we follow IRS guidelines. But there are some similarities, right? And so if you think about putting money aside without impacting public benefits, that's a similarity. However, when we talk about how much you could put in, able accounts are restricted, while special needs trusts, individuals can have millions of dollars in their able account, and they can fund that right at the beginning. Medicaid payback, you see on here, I put maybe, actually, I say I actually got this chart from Travis Finch with special needs lawyer down in the Clearwater area. He allowed me to use this, but yeah, no payback on death, and we'll talk more about that. But if somebody has a first party special needs trust, so unplanned inheritance, they won the lottery, they had significant money, automatic payback from Medicaid, and third party special needs, since it's not that person's money, it would go somewhere else. Can you use to pay food and shelter? Able, yeah, you can definitely do that. Trust, no, they're not going to, typically won't allow you to do that. Tax-free earnings, there's a whole complicated tax system at the highest rate for trust. Lifetime limits, yeah, if you can get the 418 for able, that's about as high as you're going to let you contribute to, but it can continue to grow. But especially in trust, you can have a bunch. Exempt from creditors, typically low fees. We do trust could be a little bit more costly, a little more complicated. And what's also unique is the able can be controlled by the beneficiary directly if they want to. And so really the two types of trusts that you're going to talk about is first party and third party. First party or self-settled trust. These are trusts where people, it's their money. The money is somehow titled to them, whether it be an unplanned inheritance, maybe a personal injury award. They can establish it under the age of 65 with a D4A. There's also something called qualified income. Oh, here we go. She's going to correct me. Who is this? Oh, okay. Ron's typing. All right, I'll have to get to this, Ron. All right, federal law. So Ron has a question here. Let me finish this slide here, and I'll go to Ron's question. And so, and then pooled special needs trust, right? That's commingled funds with other individuals to have the same kind of benefits of a trust, but usually they're pooled together because sometimes it's cheaper, reduced cost, easier management by a nonprofit. But those first party stuff, so there's mandatory payback. Finally, third party special needs trust. That's somebody else setting up the trust on behalf of that individual, all with the same goal for them to maintain eligibility for public benefits. That's what trusts are for, just like able accounts and for some instances. But that's set up by a family friend, and it's all third party money. Sometimes it can be funded post-death, so insurance policies get funded, proceeds from a home sale, etc. Specific to each beneficiary. And since it's a third party, it was never that beneficiary's information to begin with. It would be distributed to other benefits. So really the big differences between these types of accounts. The great thing is a special needs trust can be used to fund an able account. Yeah, able is maybe more flexible, but it's restricted on how much money you can put onto it. A lot of individuals we talk to, they see the benefits of having both, right? It's not one or the other. We're just a financial tool. A special needs trust is a kind of an estate planning tool. They often work together. But especially when you trust, there's just a lot more rules. There's an attorney has to set up, a trustee is involved. It can be costly. Able's kind of a great way to say, I want to put money away now. I have somebody who wants to give me $100, they can jump it into my Able account. So that's kind of the differences. So I want to read Ron's question here. It's a good question. It says, federal law allows that when a beneficiary passes away and after all standing qualified disability expenses are paid, a state may file a claim on a Medicaid expenditures. Is that on my next slide? Oh, look at that, death of beneficiary. So we're going to talk exactly about Ron's thing right now. But I'll go ahead and keep reading it here. It says, a state may file a claim on Medicaid expenditures on their Able account, but thanks to the signing of HB 6047 here in Florida, we passed our own legislation that says Medicaid cannot file a claim directly onto an Able United account. Instead, it would go to their estate. So what all does that mean? And this is actually, see, Ron got these slides ahead of time and jumped the gun by literally a slide or two. But this is that HB 6047 that passed. This is what changed it statutorily. This is what it says statutorily. It says basically, hey, I already said it, but leftover funds, paid qualified disability expenses, then it would go to the estate of the beneficiary. Now there is something called Medicaid estate Medicaid estate recovery, or Medicaid estate recovery basically says if the individual is over the age of 55, they don't have a spouse or a child that has a significant disability they're taken care of, that Medicaid has a right to claim that on their estate and recoup costs that they've expensed over their lifetime for Medicaid services. They can't recoup directly from the Able account. So the Able account first would have to be all standing qualified expenses, including funeral and burial. Then it would go to the estate. If they're over the age of 55, that's something to keep in mind. Maybe you don't want to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in your Able account. And so to keep in mind of, hey, Medicaid state recovery may come in effect if they're over that age. So something to keep about and say, hey, well, what can I do in the meantime with my Able account that's going to help them achieve a better life experience? I usually tell individuals, like, Able stands for achieving a better life experience. It doesn't stand for asset building, leave it to your estate. It doesn't stand for that, because the goal is for somebody to achieve that better life experience. And you can't really do that when you're 9 feet on the ground. You have to go out and do something they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. So that could be, excuse me. So that could be going on a cruise. It could be, putting that down payment on a home. It could be getting additional services to make their life a better experience that they normally wouldn't have been able to as ever. Now, something that did pass on a federal level that kind of clarified final regulations on something called successor designated beneficiary. So let's say you have an individual who has a sibling who qualifies for Able. There is a way to allow leftover funds to go to that sibling. But there are some caveats to that. First of all, before that transfer can take place, if they would have had estate Medicaid recovery, they get first claim. If there's federal estate tax that need to be imposed, that's going to take place first. And then at that point, those leftover funds could be transferred over to a successor designated beneficiary. There's some statement here on Medicaid repayment from other states. To my knowledge, no other state has filed a Medicaid claim on the Florida's Able program. However, I know specifically there's 3 or 4 other states that their Medicaid program is filing claims actively on Able accounts in their state. So that is something to keep in mind if you're becoming guardian of somebody that might have received Medicaid from a different state, or if they're moving out of the state of Florida to a new state and they get Medicaid from that new state, they potentially could file on an Able account. And so I always try to tell people, hey, what's the goal of the Able account, right? It's not to, build up and then pass away and leave it to somebody. It's really to achieve a better life experience. That's a big thing I kind of stress for individuals. So what does that look like for here in the state of Florida? What does our practice look like? And so this kind of is the breakdown, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I'm providing this, or I have provided this all to you all for to be distributed, so you will have that. But basically, this is the process if you have an individual that passes away that you're managing their Able account for. First of all, still use the ABLE account to pay outstanding qualified expenses, funeral and burial. They had, mortgage that need to be paid off, whatever that outstanding fees are, those would all be paid first. Then there comes to a point where either there's no more funds left and they can close the account, or if there's still funds left, then they would have to, if you're not the personal representative of their estate, then you would have to talk to an attorney, get an estate set up, and then we would transfer those leftover funds to that estate. If you're not serving as the authorized legal representative on the ABLE account, maybe they're somehow managing themselves, or maybe somebody else was, then we would just need documentation saying, hey, I'm the personal representative of the deceased beneficiary's estate, and I need to take over this ABLE account to pay those remaining expenditures. But yeah, it can be a complicated process. I've seen, unfortunately, a handful of individuals passing away with $20,000-$30,000, and we're sending it off to an attorney, and it's going through probate sometimes, unfortunately. So things to keep in mind, though, especially if you're serving individuals over the age of 55 with an ABLE account. So any questions as it relates to this? I know this is probably one of the, it's not the happiest things. I'd rather go back to spending money on, a vacation or something. But any questions as it relates to the process of the death of beneficiary? All right. As I mentioned, feel free to use that chat box, or just unmute yourself and start talking. Those are acceptable ways. All right. So let's talk through some hypothetical situations. And then we'll have about 10 minutes or so to go ahead and open the floor for questions. And then you'll have to ask questions, or it would be awkward silence for 5 minutes. So let's talk about some hypotheticals, right? Let's say you have a 35-year-old female, spina bifida. She receives a small one-time inheritance or maybe a personal injury award and is currently receiving Medicaid funding. And so once again, you might want to talk to an attorney, but you could have a spin down plan, so they're maintain their Medicaid eligibility. You could dump up to $17,000 into the ABLE account. Maybe it's a process where you are going through a pooled trust and splitting contributions to an ABLE account over 2 years. And so that's something to keep in mind. I've seen a couple of cases where small personal injury of $10,000, they open an ABLE account, put that full $10,000 in there. So that is possible. That is something to think about. And, it's a significantly large one. You maybe best to talk to an attorney and the best way to go about doing that. All right. Oh, look, this has you guys in it. 51-year-old male with Down syndrome lives in Florida, has a Florida guardian, but has siblings and family across the country that want to help pay housing expenses. Okay, so maybe you're the guardian of an individual, this 51-year-old male. He has a brother that lives up in New York and a sister out in California or something, and they say, hey, we can't be there. He's great where he's at, but we want to help somehow. How can we do that? Well, you can establish an ABLE account, provide them the ABLE account number, either set up a gifting page where they can go online and contribute to his account, or give them a gifting form with that account number. And that family can say, hey, we'll put in $2,000 a month so you can have a nicer home. And then you can utilize that ABLE account to pay those housing related expenses and not jeopardize SSI or Medicaid, and have that person live in a nicer place. So it's a great way to utilize ABLE accounts to have families help support an individual, especially as it relates to housing and if they're on SSI. So a great way to do that and not have a reduction of SSI. So, that's $3,600 extra in somebody's pocket potentially if they go that well. All right, here's another situation. 22-year-old recently diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, starts receiving SSI. SSA determined person is incapable of managing their SSI payment, so they have a rep payee. Could the rep payee establish this account on their behalf? However, someone else may be better suited. So you may find yourself, since you guys are guardians, so this may not be as applicable, because usually guardians, as I mentioned, they're the highest level on that hierarchy. So really the buck stops with you. You should be the first one established in an ABLE account. However, if you let's say, take somebody over as guardian and they have an ABLE account and it was established prior to you taking over, you may have to work in actually changing that authorized legal representation to yourself. And the great thing is it's a form. Literally, it's a 2-page form where the previous ALR signing off saying, hey, I'm letting go of this account. The new ALR signs on. You're putting your contact information, and then that's settled. So that may be a better example for you all is, hey, I have a new client. Oh, they have an ABLE account. And so one of the questions we get is like, how do you know if somebody has an ABLE account or not? And so our system, we use, as I mentioned, this program called Vestwell. It's our back-end record-keeping system. It's actually a fintech company based out of New York. That was previously with Bank of New York Mellon. They kind of spun it off. But anyways, their system, they run, to my knowledge, let's see, 16 other state ABLE programs. And since we're all in the same database, if you try to establish an account with us with a social, our system will know if that social is somewhere in the system. However, if they were in a different state program, let's say Texas, and they had an ABLE account with the Texas ABLE program, that's a different backend system. We'll let you still create the ABLE account in Florida. So it's really good for you to know to say, hey, do they have an ABLE account? Especially if they're coming from out of state, because if there's 2 ABLE accounts, only the first one's going to actually count as an ABLE account. The other one could count as resources and negatively impact them. So something to keep in mind if you're establishing ABLE accounts for somebody and they're coming from out of the state of Florida. All right, this just says, this is giving an example of like what happens if you have an individual that has split custody and putting money into an ABLE account. Mom receives full custody of an 8-year-old. Court ruled dad has to pay child support. Child support can go into an ABLE account up to $13.33 a month. However, that still counts as unearned income. Remember, ABLE accounts don't shelter unearned or earned income. By unearned, I mean whether that be child support, whether that be regular Social Security benefits, whether that be Veterans Affairs benefits, DVA's putting money in. That still counts as unearned income. So we don't shelter income. I can't say that enough. Okay, finally, this is an individual that has split residency. This is the one I was looking at. You have somebody that maybe they reside half the time here in Florida, the other half the time they're in a different state. Which ABLE program should they open? The great thing is, although they can only have one ABLE account, being in Florida gives you Florida's option as well as 26 other states programs who are open for nationwide enrollment. I always encourage individuals to check out what their state's ABLE program. In this situation, since they're split custody, Pennsylvania may offer better benefits for the dad since their state income tax. And it's like, hey, let's open in Pennsylvania. I could dump money into it. I could deduct that from my state income taxes. So that's something to always encourage individuals. I still recommend ABLE United just because we don't have any fees, and that's the biggest thing you're going to see with other states. But there could be some unique benefits to that other state program. So that was a whirlwind of information. So this is when all of you need to formulate your questions, get ready to start chatting or putting in a chat or unmuting yourself. And while you're doing that, I want to talk about how you can reach us. So first of all, if you haven't been to our website, shame on you. ableunited.com. It's a great plethora of resources. We have a great blog section. We have printed collateral, electronic collateral. We have material in Spanish, Haitian Creole. That's all available on our website. And you can even request printed material on our website under the professional resources tab. If you go on there, you can go, you know what, actually, this is the one benefit. If somebody lets you take control of a presentation, you can actually change what you're presenting. And so, of course, I don't know what I'm sharing now, so I'm going to share you our website. So if you haven't gone to our website yet, ableunited.com, go on here, learn all about the account. And one thing, if I don't stress this, I'll get yelled at later. But if you're serving somebody that qualifies for able and they don't have an account yet, do it by November 12th. We'll give them $50 into their account. So great way to try it out. But one thing I do want to draw your attention to is if you hover over the resources tab and drop down to professional resources, we created this page specifically for professionals. So whether that be legal, yourselves as guardians, this has all the kind of like legalese and where can I go that it says, you know, this is okay for HUD. Well, guess what? Here's a link to the actual HUD language. Where can I learn about final treasury regulations? Because it puts me to sleep. So go there. But the big thing is here on the top, you'll notice this request collateral button. Here you can actually say, maybe you want printed materials. Maybe you're guardian for 12 individuals. You like to have something in hand. Here you go, tell us who you are, where you want to sit, and then tell us, quick start guides. How many, it's a little 12-page booklet that we have. I have one here in front of me, so it's a little, if you haven't seen one of these, it's great. It walks through. But you can go on there and request, say, hey, send me a packet of them, and we'll do that free of charge. So definitely encourage you to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen and then go back to sharing my other screen so you can learn about contact us stuff. We also have a calendar, so if we're out and about, I travel more frequently than I would like. And then also how you can get a hold of us. And you can always reach out to agent and they'll give you my personal information. They'll just blast it there and you can always get a one-off conversation with me, or you can go on our website and book one as well. So, but that is my presentation. As remember, this is hopefully informational for you all, and that you learned something new and exciting. But what kind of questions do you all have about ABLE accounts? Ooh, now they're coming. I think you guys are just waiting to hit enter. All right. Here's the first one. Is a guardian required to obtain court order to open the ABLE account? So we get this question, right? And the attorneys I talk to, I always say it depends, right? Because then it's like it really, and unfortunately it does. So most in cases, no, from my understanding, because you have the ability to open it. However, most, from what I understand, they do want you to report that they have an ABLE account. So you might not need a court order to open it. You may, depending on your district, but they do, from my understanding, most of them say, no, go ahead and report that they have an ABLE account, what the balance is, just so they know, and it's record, because it is an asset in the beneficiary's name. So that's something to think about. All right, Florida annual deposit limit was increased to $17,000 in 2023. Instead of $13.33 per month. All right, Ron is fact checking my slides there. Thank you, Rod. I appreciate. And he says he loves ABLE. Thank you. That is awesome. All right, what other questions do you have about ABLE accounts? Do any of you serve individuals currently that have an ABLE account? That would be good to know. Yes, no, maybe. All right, we got one yes. And 41 no's.
Well, while they're digging it up, I have a question, and I don't know if anybody else is thinking this, but what happens when there's a guardian of the person and a guardian of the property? How does ABLE handle that when maybe one person is responsible for money and another person's responsible for the person?
Ooh, that is a good question, right? Because at the end of the day, ABLE is a financial product, right? I'm assuming there's some kind of balance of when that person wants to expense somebody. And that's the thing, I don't know from my guardian. Like, so if a person say, hey, they want to go out to eat this weekend, how does that work? Like, I don't know. Like, is it?
So maybe Claudia, do you want to speak up and talk to that since you were saying it was a good question?
Yeah, so basically, usually guardian of person includes benefits. So this is where this gets a little dicey because they have the responsibility to maintain those benefits. So this is like one of those things that if the relationship between the guardian of property and the guardian of person is good, it would make sense for the guardian person to open the account, possibly, and use it in daily life because they're in charge of residents, social, health, etc. But if there's not a good relationship, I would say it it becomes a real problem.
Hmm.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, when someone else is in charge of the money, but technically, because a representative payee and a guardian can open the account, it could be either. But in my mind, the person who's responsible for the qualified medical or qualified expenses is the guardian of person.
Hmm. But what is an ABLE account? It's a financial account, right?
Correct.
You know, like
But
it's
so is a representative payee account, and that's
Yeah.
not under property.
That's true. That's true. And we didn't get about talking about leftover Social Security funds going into an ABLE account. High level, the same rep payee rules that apply still apply to ABLE, right? So you're not like, oh, I'm getting away. So for example, if there's commingled funds in an ABLE account, you can still have that, but Social Security wants to know what part of theirs is Social Security funds, which one is ABLE. So that's all those rules still apply for ABLE accounts, and that's something I'm learning more about, but we're also learning as well.
Well, I guess maybe part of the question would be how many you talked about the authorized legal representative form that you have. How many people could be that to one of your clients?
Unfortunately, only one. And unfortunately, it's more based on the structure of how it's structured on the back end, how it's just set up through the bank that way. Ideally, I would love to have two or more because I can't. That's probably one of the most requests I get now is like, hey, mom and dad have an account. There's a situation where it's split somehow and they both want to be able to have login credentials to manage it. And unfortunately, we don't at this time have that ability. But that's a very interesting question, Claudia. I'm gonna have to do some more thinking about that and talking to some more attorneys and stuff. So I appreciate it.
It sounds like if you guys have a case where you have a co-guardian involved, you guys probably need to communicate big time before you go down the rabbit hole of opening an ABLE account for this client. And then I don't know, you guys may have some input. I don't know. It sounds like you don't need a court order for it. You may want to notice the court depending on if it's some issues. You guys know more about that than I do about putting the court on notice and
At
stuff,
least
but
run it by both attorneys. At
okay.
least run it by both attorneys.
Absolutely. That is dealing with financial activity and as a guardian of the person, the court would want to know about that because I believe that is out of bounds.
Yep.
So that's my big question to get everybody talking. You guys got other questions or other thoughts about even that question?
All right, they're a little quiet,
Well, it looks like Judy says it's very timely. She needs an account now. It sounds like for one of her clients. So I'm glad we could teach you about that. We hope you guys got some good information. John's a great resource. And like he said, you can always reach out and schedule time with him. If you guys come up with questions after this, we'll make sure you guys get all the slides if you haven't already, and you'll get all his contact information. And we record this. So if you want to watch it again, you're welcome to do that too. But John, I mean, we've dealt with John for many, many years, and he's very helpful. I know he likes people reaching out and asking questions, and he's good about responding. But yeah, if you guys have any other questions, please, there's still time on the clock.
great information, needs an account. Yeah. But if you do, for example, this discussion we're having about property person who manages, if you find a solution or you find some guidance, of course, your circuit court might be a little bit different than the neighbor to your south or east or even north. So I'm always interested to know, and that's something I'm definitely going to take back as I think I'll be at the Elder Law Conference in January. So that'd be a good couple people. I'll pick their brains on that topic.
So John, before you ask about the fees, it looks like everybody's asking about how to watch the replay. We will send it out when we send your certificate. So we'll send you a link there. We'll also put it in the Facebook group. So there'll be lots of ways for you guys to watch the replay. If for some reason you don't get this, I will put Kate's email address in the chat. Kate is my marketing assistant, and she's the one that sends out the certificates. So you can always reach out to her for the link to the replay. However, it looks like there are also questions about your monthly fees, John. So do you want to talk about your fees?
Yeah, no fees. So we do not charge a monthly maintenance fee for this account. Really, the only fees are if you use it For the prepaid card, $250 a month, that's going to be charged on the card for, if you want that, $2.50. If you want like an overnighted check, a wire, some kind of thing outside of the typical thing, there'll be fees for that. But when it comes to a monthly maintenance fee, we don't have any. And then we do have our investment options. The actual investment side, not the FDIC option, has a administrative percentage that's charged. It's an annualized fee, so at 0.29% annualized of whatever the balance of the account is. That's it.
So low fees, hardly anything.
Yep. That's a great benefit. Like I say, a lot of people love working with the special needs trust. It gives less work for the trustees. Easier just to chunk it over to enable and let them utilize it. But you guys got me some great feedback on things I need to dig in a little bit more and see if I can come up with a better response. But that's a good question.
Good. Yeah, and we just, as an aside with Aged, we work, back and forth with John about transferring between the trust and Able. So if you guys ever have questions, you can reach out to us. You can reach out to John. We both kind of know how all that stuff works. Looks like Ron's also saying guardian advocate has to have more flexibility if APD. I think this is a question. The guardian advocate has more flexibility if APD qualified person can spend themselves? ? You see Ron's question?
Yeah, I see Ron's question. I'm just trying to. Ron might have to unmute himself and provide a little more clarity. Guardian advocate have more flexibility.
Can you explain that one to us, Ron? If you can't come off mute, you can always add more to the chat.
Wondering like who are more qualified, right? Because that range of individuals, maybe he's talking about the hierarchy of who can establish this account. Could a guardian advocate do it? Potentially, unless that individual guardian may have control of purse string, advocate can help. Guardian, yeah, I really.
That's okay, Ron. We understand you don't have a microphone. Looks like Claudia's trying to help too. The guardian advocate, a person of property or rep payee. So.
Yeah, because usually, and that's what's unique, right? Because it's a hierarchy there for a reason for somebody who cannot manage their own account, right? So if somebody doesn't have that capacity, they can have one of those other individuals, or they can even select somebody. We just recently passed in May, I think, the ability for an individual to select somebody that's not one of those individuals on the hierarchy. So it could be, a friend, it could be an aunt, a neighbor that you're good friends with that could manage this account if they chose to. So really, it's, the only thing I would be, if somebody does not, for example, let's say an account is established and it's not done by a power of attorney or guardian, that individual could technically come in and take over their own ABLE account. So we tell parents, it's like, hey, you can set this up, but when they become 18, we'll still allow you as the parent to manage this account. But if you don't have things in order, they could come in and say, hey, I'm taking over this account and I'm spending all the money and there's nothing you could do with it. So that's when a power of attorney or a guardian may need to take place. So it's something to keep in mind.
That was a good tip. Do you guys have any other questions? Well, we want to thank you, John. This has been a super helpful information, a super helpful session, and lots of information for everybody. We've been hearing about ABLE accounts. I know it helps lots of people. You guys probably have lots of clients it could help. So I'm glad we could teach you about it and John could come speak to you all. So thank you, John.
Thank you all for having me so much. And until we meet again, appreciate your time.
Definitely. And we'll send all these certificates out and all the recordings out, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, John. Bye.